All right, all right, all right, all right. Here we are, here we are. We have made it to the end of the week. Thank you. Thank you for your attention, your time this week. I hope you've gotten a lot out of it. I hope you get a lot out of this session in particular. We are talking about cloud operations in this session. This is COP 302. Best practices for centralized operations management. My name is Dave Cliff. I am from the AWS safety engineering team. That probably means nothing to you right now, but it will mean something to you in just a second. And my colleague?
Good morning, everybody. Thanks very much for sticking with us and being here. My name is Steve Rice. I work on AWS App Config.
Now, we're going to start with a warning, okay? Starting with a warning. Flashing lights and graphics will be used in this session. Okay, in fact, they're going to come in about 10 to 15 seconds, so that is your fair warning. But I want you to think back to your childhood, to going to school. What do you remember? What is the fondest memory that you have from school? Steve, hit me with your fondest memory from school.
Yeah,
what did you enjoy the most?
Probably like most people in the room, I was kind of a math and science guy. I was digging on algebra, I'd say.
Steve, no, come on, Steve. Try again. What was your fondest memory from school?
I think snow days, maybe? I don't know. Recess?
Steve, you're killing me here. No, of course, it's fire drills. Fire drills. Did everybody get into fire drills when they were a kid? Man, I love fire drills. Now, so we brought the visual component here, but I need a little bit of help from all of you. If you could provide a little bit of the audio component to get us in the mood of a fire drill, that would be great, okay? So everybody on the count of 3, I want your loudest, most obnoxious fire drill noise. Fire alarm. All right, ready? On the count of 3. 1, 2, 3. Yeah, that was pretty good. I like that. Well done. Okay, so why are we talking about fire drills when we're supposed to be talking about cloud operations? Well, if you remember anything about fire drills when you were growing up, maybe you were like me and you had a principal who, the fire drill goes off and the principal's sitting there with a stopwatch and he's looking at the stopwatch really close and he's like timing everybody to get out and get out there as fast as possible, right? But it turns out that the principal wasn't responsible just for getting out, helping you get out fast, right? Because the principal was also going over the intercom and saying, please everyone, proceed to the exits in an orderly fashion. And that just little bit of kind of centralized process, if you will, was a good enough reminder for everyone that it wasn't just about speed. It was about getting out safely as well. And speed and safety are two things that we're going to talk about in the context of cloud operations. So we're really excited to be here to chat a little bit more about this idea of centralized operations management, and we want to do it in kind of a way that hopefully caters to wherever you're coming at from an organizational perspective. We want to talk to cloud operations teams, kind of those central teams who are really kind of building the foundation of operations in your organization. And then we want to spend a bunch of time talking about application teams and what is their role in terms of operations and how do you kind of serve those teams. And so we're really just going to unpack kind of the communication between these different groups within your organization. And we do want to share a little bit about AWS and how we do this internally, how we've actually built tools to hopefully help you do this yourself as well. And so I really hope that you take a lot from this. We're going to focus on best practices and some of the things that we've learned certainly over the time spending around incident management, compliance, application management, the whole gamut. All right, so let's dive in. So let's start with why centralize anything, right? If you know anything about AWS, very highly distributed organization. We'll get into that in a little bit. But why centralize anything? Well, if you're coming from a place in your organization where you've got a lot of on-premises infrastructure, maybe you've got that typical like app and ops split. Maybe you've got an infrastructure team that owns, maybe you got a database team, you got some kind of layering that's happening, and then the application teams kind of sit on top. And so you've always done it this way, right? We've always done it this way. But it turns out that moving to cloud actually affords you some opportunities to change that potentially or challenge that structure because you have better agility in the cloud. You have better access to APIs. You have higher level services that you can take advantage of. And so we've always done it this way doesn't necessarily mean that you should do it this way in kind of moving some of those workloads to the cloud. Now, one of the other things that we hear very frequently for centralization is process optimization, right? You want a single kind of process owner in one part of your org, and you're going to optimize that process through that person or that group, and not have to expose necessarily the entire organization to different parts of that, whether it's compliance, whether it's your incident management process, et cetera. So process optimization, definitely a reason that we centralize often. And then compliance, which I just mentioned, right? You going through audits, is painful. You centralize that oftentimes and make it such that that's one person's responsibility to kind of pull all that out. But what if I told you that one of the best ways for you as a cloud ops team, kind of a central team in your organization, one of the best ways that you can make your organization more effective is to focus on helping application teams move faster safely. You can be a force multiplier for your organization. Because the reality is that those application teams, they're building things that reach your end customer. And so your job really should be to enable them to be more effective. So an example of what do we centralize within AWS? Well, if you know anything about the way that we operate, we have this idea of 2 pizza teams. These are just really kind of small teams of builders, but they own a customer outcome from top to bottom. They own that promise to the customer. And that includes everything from application code all the way on down to the infrastructure that runs it, including operations. And so one of the things that is really important about that is that those teams also own the KPIs, the key performance indicators, and the health of that customer promise. That is their promise to customers. So again, if we have a networking outage in a particular data center and a number of different AWS services are impacted, we're not just calling networking. We're calling all those individual service teams to say, hey, you've broken your promise to customers. You need to mobilize and get going. But in that example, we don't want every one of those service teams ringing up the networking team all at the same time. So what we centralize is this idea of responding to major impacts. So these large, messy incidents, those individual teams will kind of own their own incident response, but in these large, messy incidents, we have to centralize that. And so we have a team, safety engineering, that is responsible for kind of taking ownership of those larger, messy incidents. And we own automation for that. We own tooling for ourselves, as well as tooling for the rest of the organization around understanding their own incident availability, or application availability, excuse me. And so that's one of the ways that we centralize within AWS, despite being, again, a very highly distributed organization. So the way I want to unpack centralized operations management is really in kind of thinking through what are the interactions between that central cloud ops team, which may include your cloud center of excellence, right? Kind of that team that is intended to kind of understand different services, maybe introduce them to the organization, implement best practices, architectural decisions, and kind of make those available in the organization. We want to look at the communications between cloud ops and application teams. So one of the first areas is definitely service management, right? Your incident, problem, change management processes. Another thing is application management, so how you organize internally. That's very relevant for application teams to be able to communicate that in some way that makes sense to cloud operations groups. Then you've got compliance management that, again, cloud ops is typically responsible for and is kind of pushing requirements up onto those application teams, maybe setting guardrails, best practices. And then finally, operations management, because again, one of the tenets certainly of what Werner said back in 2006, the you build it, you run it mentality, is the fact that those application teams really need to own their customer promise and thereby need to be involved in operations. So this is how we're going to kind of unpack this session today. Now, what if I told you that we actually have an AWS service that is focused on this idea of centralized operations management that enables teams to work more effectively together, to proactively automate, to have visibility, to be able to remediate operational issues centrally. What if I told you it was AWS Systems Manager? Is that a surprise to anyone? Anybody using Systems Manager today already? Yeah, we got a few people. That's great. So Systems Manager, again, traditionally been much more focused on node management, right? A lot of patching, session management capabilities, run command. But with the advent of some things like automation, with some of the operations management tooling that we've kind of layered on top, with the integrations that we have into ITSM systems like Jira and ServiceNow, and the ability to kind of orient around applications in a hybrid environment. So this is one of the other things that Systems Manager is really good at, is enabling you to light up those on-premises hosts that you maybe are managing using SSM Agent, and then being able to then use the rest of the ecosystem of tools around automation and everything that layers on top of that for your on-premises environment. So supporting hybrid is kind of built into the way that Systems Manager really works. So we're going to, throughout the rest of the session, just unpack this idea of using Systems Manager for cloud ops, using it for application teams. So how do you build that foundation for cloud operations? Well, we're going to drill into specifically cloud operations teams, and then Steve, my colleague, is going to get up and share a little bit more of the application team perspective here. But we're going to look specifically at service management and compliance management here. Okay, so where do you start? If you're a cloud ops team, where exactly do you start? So the place to start really, again, and this is something that kind of gets drilled into us via leadership principles at Amazon, is this idea of working backwards from the customer. You probably heard Werner talk about it yesterday as well. Work backwards from your customer. So who is your customer? Who is the cloud ops customer? Well, it turns out it's application teams. That's really who you should be serving. So you kind of have to spend time with them. You might have to talk to them even. Terrifying, I know. But the more insights that you can get out of what are you building? What are you wanting to build? How are we serving our end customers? How do they operate in terms of their organization? That will help you to understand what you need to build in order to better support them and where you need to meet them potentially. Because one of the realities is definitely that, traditionally, if you're kind of coming from an organization where, most of your operations knowledge is in that cloud ops team, you're probably working with a lot of application developers that don't have a lot of experience operating. And so there is, a lot of teaching and training and best practices and guardrails that you're going to need to put in place in order to facilitate that and make that work. And thankfully, again, thanks to the DevOps movement, this is definitely becoming more of a kind of a well-known principle, and we're really happy for that. The next thing you're going to do is again, understand practices and trade-offs, and this goes back to, your Cloud Center of Excellence. I love this tweet on the side. It's there not to concentrate excellence, but actually to disseminate it through the organization. So if you're not training and teaching and kind of helping teams to kind of experiment and learn and introducing mechanisms to actually make them better, that's really where you need to be focused. You got to enable them as much as possible and not just kind of concentrate your, well, I'm the expert here. This is how you do it. But honestly, I see a lot of really great kind of architectural teams out of, kind of that CCOE that can really provide some of that great architectural guidance and do, what we call internally kind of bar raising, having a kind of a bar raising program that can be really effective. So understanding best practices and trade-offs. And then I've mentioned this already, but build repeatable mechanisms. So use tools that will connect you to your customer. Don't just kind of say, well, app teams use those tools over there. They use their application performance monitoring, and we don't touch that. But we have our own infrastructure monitoring over here, and they don't touch that. That doesn't work, right? You need to facilitate communication and collaboration between those groups in order to be most effective. Okay. So let's jump into more specifically incident management. This is a particular area of interest for me. And how does a cloud ops team enable and kind of empower application teams to take on some ownership here and to be most effective? Well, what we've found internally, if you look at this as a flywheel for shortening incidents, you've got kind of a basic kind of incident lifecycle, right? Detect, respond, recover, learn, and improve. That's going to if you can nail that part of the flywheel, you will definitely get better over time. But it turns out you can help application teams to drive this flywheel faster if you help them to prepare more effectively. And this is where, again, the cloud ops groups can be much more effective by, having programs, things like operational readiness review that we'll talk about in a little bit, that helps them to kind of prepare most effectively. Now, with AWS, in terms of the tools that we've given you already, you're probably familiar with things like CloudWatch, Systems Manager Automation, Ops Center, Run Command, all these things for kind of detecting, responding, recovering from operational issues. It turns out that we actually launched something earlier this year as part of the operations management category within Systems Manager. We'll take a look at it in a demo in just a second, but it's called Incident Manager, and it's really focused on, again, closing that feedback loop around learning and then helping those teams to prepare more effectively. Now, you may be wondering, what does that preparation really look like? And I'm glad you asked. How do you prepare most effectively for incidents? Well, we have this concept internally we call response plans, and it really kind of maps to failure modes. It's, have some forethought around a particular application or a workload. Like, what does failure look like? What kind of failure is it? Is it, high latency between front and back end nodes? Is it slow database queries? Is it like a dependency that you have is just completely unavailable? What does that look like? What are those failure modes? And honestly, how would you detect that? Like, then you can kind of identify a signal that's like, okay, no, this is what we're going to see if and when that scenario kind of comes to pass. So you can instrument for that, and we use CloudWatch for that internally ourselves. That's how you would know. And then from there, you can actually even help teams to go beyond that. You can help them to think through, okay, well, it's great that we've instrumented this alarm, and so we know that this failure mode is happening. But who needs to be paged? What do they need to do in order to diagnose? Like, what procedures do they have in place? Because you're probably not coming from a place of like fully automated run books from the get-go. Guess what? We're not either. Our AWS service teams, they have a lot of run books that are just kind of manual steps, but we automate them over time, and that's a key part of this. And then where do we collaborate? So it's kind of the who. Who are you paging? How are you getting a hold of them? What are they doing? Are they following in the ideal case? And where do you collaborate? Where are you going to kind of connect with people if and when you need to actually work closely with somebody in an urgent situation? And then from all of that, you can kind of track an incident through to completion and then hopefully identify actions to help you learn and improve. So we're going to look at this idea of kind of preparing for incidents and leveraging that in just a second. I want to move on and talk a little bit about compliance as well, because compliance kind of has its own flywheel. It's just around, in this case, risk reduction, right? That's really what you're trying to do as a cloud ops group, is help to reduce the risk of the things that the different app teams are using, and be able to, in order to be able to do that, there's a few things that you can do. Now, the first thing that I'll call out here is the fact that, again, I glossed over this a little bit earlier. Application owners, you really need to give them kind of if they're going to be responsible for operations, you kind of got to give them their own kind of self-managed environment for managing their operations. But you want to hook that up to something where you can kind of centrally operate, where you can see, where you have visibility into what they're doing. And so you could be using things like Control Tower to do this, anything to kind of inject those best practices, give a little bit in terms of guardrails, in order to kind of reduce risk and take advantage of some of the services that we have for that. But then you really just need to build this kind of wheel of like being able to inspect what is going on in those application accounts, evaluate some amount of risk associated with it, like is this something that they need to fix right away? Is it something that is just, is not maybe a burning issue, but you can kind of work with them on it, and then hopefully remediate it. And there's a bunch of great tools that I'll show you for doing that within the AWS portfolio as well. And ultimately, a lot of this is going to require mechanisms, because you're not going to just, if there's an EC2 instance that is not using one of your approved AMIs that doesn't have a particular security patch that you need, as a cloud ops group, it's like, okay, great, well, we're just going to get in and remediate that. Well, what if that application is serving like, 5 million customer requests right now? What have you done in order to kind of reduce your risk? What have you done in order to actually, in order to do that? What's the impact to your business in order to do that? So it turns out that there is kind of communication that needs to be leveraged between your groups. The way that we kind of implement compliance management on top of AWS, we leverage Systems Manager, as I mentioned, leverage a lot of the automation capabilities that we have with that, but then plug it into things like AWS Config, which is kind of your cloud CMDB. It allows you to kind of execute rules to ensure that they're in compliance with either a standard or a particular check that you have that's custom for your organization. So you can use Config, you can use CloudTrail, you can use EventBridge, kind of pipe all of that information into Systems Manager, leverage the automation capabilities. And then there's a bunch of capabilities within Systems Manager that can kind of help you to do this. So things like Quick Setup and Explorer give you some kind of guardrails, those best practices that you can kind of instill in the accounts to begin with. They allow you to get kind of visibility into what are the types of issues that they're seeing. And then tools like Patch Manager and Change Manager help to kind of facilitate that remediation process so that you can ultimately reduce risk. Okay, so we're going to switch over to a demo now, and I want to show you some of this working in action. In fact, that particular scenario that I brought up, we're going to go walk through. So we're going to talk about kind of a security patch compliance issue that a CloudOps team can kind of see and then work with. So here I am within Systems Manager in the AWS console, and you can see I'm within Quick Setup here. And Quick Setup is there, again, more just to kind of help you establish those best practices for laying out particular key operational capabilities across accounts. So something like conformance packs, as an example, which allows you to kind of roll up a number of config rules. You can go ahead and enable conformance packs and actually roll this out across your entire AWS organization, all of the accounts or particular OUs if you want to target that. And you'll notice that out of the box, we provide a number of different conformance packs here. You have ones that are tied to well-architected security, different reliability pillars. You've got a number of different kind of compliance standards here, as well as ones that are specific to maybe operational best practices for EC2. And I can then roll that out across my set of accounts and make sure that those application accounts are kind of adhering to those best practices. Now, the other thing we're going to use in this demo is something called AWS Systems Manager Incident Manager. And you'll see it introduces this weird concept called response plans. And why do I feel like I've seen this before? Oh, you know what? We just walked through this exact diagram. So now you already know what a response plan is. This is actually the implementation of Incident Manager. It's what we've implemented to help you and help teams to more effectively prepare for incident response. Okay, so I'm going to jump over to the AWS config console real quick, because I want to take a peek at one of the rules that I've set up for approved AMIs by ID. And you'll notice that one of the things that I can do in config is I can actually set up a kind of an automated remediation. And this uses something called AWS Systems Manager Automation. So it's using automation documents. You can set up automated remediation. So great, something goes out of compliance, you can automatically remediate it. As I mentioned, in our scenario, you might not want to do that, right? You might actually want to have a conversation with the team before you go and terminate their EC2 instance or something like that. So this is great when you kind of get to the point of being able to run automated remediations. But what happens if you're kind of in that in-between state where there's more manual steps involved, there's more kind of communication that needs to happen? Well, here I am over within Systems Manager again. I'm within Ops Center. And Ops Center is where we kind of collect up those operational issues. And you can see that at the top here, I actually have one for EC2 instance is running an unauthorized AMI. And this ops item it collects up some operational data. It's got that link to the particular EC2 instance. If I jump over to related resource details, it can load things like CloudWatch metrics associated with this resource. It can load kind of details from config, CloudTrail logs, et cetera. But what I'm going to do here is actually in the top right. I've realized, hey, as a cloud ops group, this is a potentially critical security vulnerability. So I'm going to start an incident directly from this. I'm going to go ahead and start incident. I have a pre-created response plan for reporting security incident with patch compliance, and I'm going to click Start there. And what that's going to do is it's going to invoke Incident Manager, and one of the first things that my response plan does is it's going to page me, because that's just what you have to do. You got to get a hold of somebody. So we've shipped within Incident Manager the ability to support SMS, voice, email, and escalation, with plans to also kind of expand out the third-party integrations here as well, if you're using other tools for kind of paging or engagement. And so what I can show you here is actually that now I have an incident dashboard directly within this AWS console. And so there's a bunch of really great things that I can do within this console. So the first thing I can do is obviously go ahead and page somebody from the application team. So I'm going to go engage the firefighters, maybe Alice and Bob here, and we will go ahead and engage them. And so they are now being paged. They're going to have a link to this particular AWS console view. And here I'm getting a phone call now. Oh boy. All right. Well, this must be serious.
Systems Manager, Incident Manager. You have one unread page from +1 84480555855. You have been engaged into incident. This is not a drill. Patch compliance violation. You can continue listening to the content or press 1 to acknowledge the page at any.
This is not a drill. This is not a drill. All right. So I'm just going to acknowledge that, and we'll jump into some more of the capabilities of this particular interface. So one of the things, again, because this is within my AWS account, I have access to things like CloudWatch metrics. So I can actually pull in live CloudWatch metrics here into this dashboard. I can actually use those to kind of track those through to completion of the incident, hopefully resolution. You can see that these are actually live metric graphs. They're not just kind of graph snapshots, obviously. So I can kind of interact with them. I can add, obviously, different metrics related to individual resources. And then from here, I can actually also interact with the runbook, because what we've done is we've actually started the Systems Manager automation document associated with this particular response plan. So you can see I've set up a Systems Manager automation document here for a playbook for patch compliance. And you can see that this is actually just kind of a set of manual steps, right? I mean, this is your typical security incident lifecycle: contain, eradicate, recover. But you'll notice that there's this resume button here, and I've already engaged application team, so I'm going to go ahead and click that resume button here. And what that's going to do is actually move the workflow ahead, because this is not just a wiki-style runbook that I've kind of embedded in here. This is actually a Systems Manager automation document instance, right? So this is actually a workflow in and of itself. In fact, I've got it open over here in Documents, and if I go ahead and create a new version, I just want to show you what this document does. It really doesn't do any automation, believe it or not. It's just pause and automation execution so that I can follow these steps manually: engage, collaborate, contain. You can see each of these are just pausing. They're not really doing any automation. Because again, it turns out that most teams actually, if they have a kind of a procedure laid out, they don't have it fully automated. Maybe you've got like a manual step first, and then like execute the script and see if it works. And so that's an automated step. But then there's a manual step afterwards that's like, well, invalidate that it actually did the thing that it needs to do, or go page this other person. And so what this enables is kind of this idea of gradual automation, being able to kind of iterate on this over time. Because as you'll notice back in the incident dashboard, we've actually timestamped that, hey, in order to engage the application team, this took me roughly 3 minutes. So in theory, in the future, I could actually save myself close to 3 minutes by actually just kind of having that step be automated instead of just a purely manual set of instructions. So that's really great. So again, the power of that systems manager automation engine, to go from action types of pause to anything from invoke Lambda function, if you've got a Lambda already pre-configured for some of the operational steps that you have, executing a different automation document. You can execute any AWS API from here if you want, pull in logs. We see a lot of kind of prefetch of telemetry that are pretty common in these types of runbooks, or even execute scripts in line. So actually, if you have Python or PowerShell scripts that you want to kind of embed within this runbook document, you can even do that. Okay, so back over here, I want to show you kind of what it looks like to kind of close that feedback loop. So in the timeline, we are actually kind of tracking all of the different steps that have been executed, the different metrics, the different people who have been engaged. And from here, when it comes time to ultimately resolve this incident, I actually have access to something called a post-incident analysis. So I can actually have Incident Manager help me by creating a post-incident analysis on this incident. We shipped part of our internal post-incident analysis or problem management template for you. So we have a process called correction of errors internally, COE. And so we've actually shipped you part of that particular template. It asks the exact same questions that we ask ourselves in any given event that we have, customer impacting event. So this post-incident analysis is going to bring over the timeline, the metrics, and it lists out kind of a set of incident questions that you can answer around specifically detection, diagnosis, mitigation, and prevention. And if I go ahead and select, hey, you know what? Could the runbook be improved? Yeah, you know what? The runbook was a little out of date. Maybe step 2 needed some work. I can add those details. I can save that. And what that does is actually over in the Action Items tab over here, it introduces me kind of this recommended action to take. So if I accept that and add whatever other actions that I want to add myself, this will actually create a Systems Manager ops item within Ops Center. So now I've got an ops item for Update Incident Runbook. And in fact, via the connections that we have to Jira and ServiceNow, that can even create individual tickets for you to then kind of formulate on some operational backlog, organize the work, Kanban boards, however you want to organize that work getting done. All right, so if I jump back to the ops item, what you'll notice now is that this ops item actually kind of tracks the relationships that we've now made with these different connections. So I've now got, I've had an ops item that was EC2 instance running an unauthorized AMI. You'll notice that I created an incident from it. I've then created a post-incident analysis from it. And I've even created an action item from that to hopefully improve my process next time and close the loop. Internally, for any given COE, we see anywhere from about 6 to 8 action items for any given team. That's probably the rough average. Honestly, they're not just kind of prevent this from ever happening ever again. A lot of them are just learnings that we get through the process of like, oh yeah, you know what, our process, we're too slow in escalating here, or we need better training over there, or we need to improve the resilience of our architecture in this completely unrelated part of the app that we just kind of discovered as we were going through and troubleshooting. So a lot of really great actions that you can take here. All right, with that, I'm going to wrap up, and I will invite my good friend Steve up here to talk through applications and what kind of the application team view is here. So Steve, take it away.
Thank you, Dave. Appreciate it. Clicker. So hopefully you've seen some tooling that enforces best practices on the cloud operations side. I'm going to talk about sort of the other side of the coin, application management. And before I begin, I'm actually going to ask in the room, how many people out there would say that their teams are sort of a combined DevOps organization where operations and application development are sort of merged? How many people, can you raise your hand? Okay, so I see a couple. How many folks out there primarily are more on a operations side rather than an application side? Okay, great. And then how many people are more on the application side? All right, a few. Great. My career has been a little of all of that, but I'm very passionate about the application side. So again, I'm going to take the other side of the coin, the other perspective, and talk about what application teams need to do. So if you're on an application team, listen. If you're on an operations team, please take notes and bring some of these best practices back to your application team. Because again, the whole theme of this is teams need to be working together. We need tools that create connective tissue between the teams, and magic will happen. Okay. So again, the top side of the coin maybe, top side of the stack, and we're going to really drill down through the cloud operations team some best practices. And it's driven by the application team, but it's using this connective tissue and these tools to help enforce that. So let's say you're on an application team. What should you do? A couple of mindset changes. And I can remember early in my career, I remember thinking, okay, I've worked on shipping this new feature. We've been going crazy for the last 3 months. And we're 2 more weekends away, and we're working the weekends, we're working the nights, and then we're 1 week away, and then we're on launch day. And it feels so great when you launch. And it still feels great when you launch. But there's a mindset change. The end of the project for the application team isn't launch day. That's actually the start of the project. That's the first day that your customers actually use that feature. And so you have to work with your application teams, or if you're on an application team, you have to say, really, think of it as the start of the project is launch day. We've talked about this a little bit. You have to work backwards from your customer. And again, that mindset is, what do you want your customers to say about you? And I would guess that if you have good product managers on your team, they do some conversations with external end users, and they talk to them, and they have a good sense of what they want and what they need and what they might say about you. But again, a mindset change is your application team needs to look at your operations team. And what do you want your operations team to be saying about the application team? You want them to be saying, they thought ahead, they planned ahead, they gave me some tools so that I can successfully operate the application. I'm going to drill into 3 different best practices first. Operational readiness. There's something at Amazon called ORR. I'm going to dig into that. Operational readiness review. And you really want to be putting this checklist together before you launch and stress test the system before you launch. You're also going to be creative and think about, well, what could break? What could go wrong? What could go right? Let's say you launch something that's wildly successful. Are you ready to scale that? And the next piece is this concept called continuous configuration. It's sort of the extension of CI/CD. After something is deployed, delivered through CI/CD, you want to be continuously configuring it on production. I'll dig into that. Okay, so the first thing is this ORR framework, Operational Readiness Review. At Amazon, we do this at least once a year for all of our services. It's required. It is a very long checklist, and that checklist has come together through teams collaborating. And in fact, across our organizations, we get to share best practices. So we have this checklist, we execute it once per year, and every time we launch a major feature, we want to make sure, are we really ready to launch this feature? So a few weeks before launch day, you go through your ORR checklist. Sometimes it's months before, sometimes it's a few weeks. I want you to think of this checklist as really a reflection of your organizational values. As you know, inside of Amazon, a strong value we have is security. Requirement number 0 is security. Requirement number 1 is availability. And so you want this operational checklist to really stress to your application teams and to your operations teams that we need to be prepared. We really want high availability. We need product managers, for example, to do some planning about how many users do we think we're going to use this in 1 week, in 2 weeks, in 3 months. And that should be reflected in this checklist. This is a joint exercise. Coming up with this checklist and reviewing the checklist for each product, feature, service is done together, and it really starts that conversation between the teams. Okay, so again, it's almost like a hack to force the 2 teams to be working together. You can see some, if you look on our well-architected framework, we have templates and samples of ORR checklists. Here's some sample items in there. So these are questions that we ask not just the application team and not just the operations team. We ask them together. Let's say we deploy something. What's going to trigger a rollback? Are we going to have an alarm? How's that alarm going to be configured? If you want to scale up to 50%, how can you do that? What happens if you have dependencies in your application? What happens if some of those dependencies fail? Are you ready? Have you thought about that? Are you ready to try to have something that's a reasonable experience for your customers? Because dependencies can fail. And a mindset we have at Amazon is we very rarely roll something out quickly. We want to limit that blast radius, and so we roll things out gradually. That's kind of the default. And really, I think we move very fast, but we deploy very slowly. It takes 5 to 10 days for some new change that we have to get fully deployed across our system. You might say, well, why is that? It seems slow. What that allows us to do is we can deploy it to 1% of our users, do some measuring. Is everything okay? It looks good. Now 2%, now 10%, now 50%. And over time, as long as your metrics are looking good, you can roll something out to 100%. But that's our default. We do that constantly. Now, if something's wrong, of course, we have literally, it's called, in case of emergency, break glass. We have break glass scenarios too, so we can move quickly. But unless there's a darn good reason, you roll things out gradually. Another best practice is to have a meeting. It's going to be probably separate from your ORR, but let's try to think and let's be creative about what could go wrong. Dave talked a little bit about that. What are these things that we should plan for? As you know, bad stuff is going to happen. Have a joint brainstorm. And if just your operations team is brainstorming what can go wrong, you're missing half of the coin. If just your application team is thinking about this, of course, they're not going to know. So they have to do this together. As I mentioned before, too, what could go right? What are the unexpected great things that can happen? So a best practice for a application team is, well, I want to think about what could go wrong, and I'm actually going to build some tools into my software, some sort of dials and switches to allow the operations team to turn things on and off, or to dial things up and down at runtime without actually having to restart the whole application. So sometimes you might hear of this as a feature flag or an operational flag. You need to build these in before you launch. You need to think, what could go wrong, and I'm going to make this a variable, and I'm going to allow my teams that are managing this to be able to throttle things up, throttle things down. This means that the application teams need to go and get requirements from the operations team. Think of them as a customer. And the operations team need to explain, okay, well, I like it when I can do this. I want it to be really clear how to do all of that. Also, do some chaos engineering. Before you launch, try to break things. Practice some of these fire drills. Again, we talked about fire drills. I'm not going to turn it on right now, but these fire drills really help you be prepared. It builds that muscle memory so that when something goes wrong, you already know what to do. It's not the first time you're executing that run book and reading it for the first time. You've already done it in a drill situation. We also have things at Amazon called game days. You may have heard of that. You should do your own game days. You should go in and try to have people break the system. It's actually kind of fun. You can do that over a lunch. You could maybe even invite a customer to help with it, depending on what sort of service you have. But game days are a really important part of predicting the future operationally. The last thing I'm going to talk again is continuous configuration. A CI/CD pipeline is critical. Big believers in CI/CD, and I hope you all are sort of on that journey if you're not already doing that. But what that means is I have a pipeline, I commit my change, and it flows through the system, and it launches, and it's done. And I said earlier, that's not the right mindset. Launching does not equal done. Once it is launched, you want those dials and switches in place so that you can adjust the behavior of the software at runtime. So your application should be polling configuration. Maybe it's every 5 seconds. Maybe it's every 15 seconds. Maybe it's every hour. Again, depending on what your needs are, the polling frequency is going to change. But it's reading that configuration, and it's adjusting itself properly. So that gives you the ability to add database connections, reduce database connections, switch to a new database, completely rotate secrets, do all of these kind of things in real time, and you don't need to take the whole software stack down to do that. So again, in order to do this, you have to plan ahead. This is part of the requirements that should be in the launch checklist in the ORR, that do you have these dials and switches there. And again, at Amazon, there's about 3,500 teams using AWS App Config internally. Pretty much every major service is using this with this dynamic and continuous configuration so that we can operate at scale. And something goes wrong, we can break glass and we can respond to it immediately. Again, same thing, we use these switches when something is going right. We're rolling something out slowly. We use app config to turn on and off new features. So I'm going to run a demo now. Let's see here. I'm going to show you two things. Okay. The first thing I'm going to show you is kind of a sample scenario here. I'm going to start in something called AWS Systems Manager Application Manager. Application Manager is a relatively new feature of Systems Manager. It's free. You probably have heard of the term single pane of glass. It really is a single pane of glass of looking across all of the applications you have. And again, it's free, it's great. It shows you things like monitoring status, compliance status, some configuration status, and you can have your list of different applications and see it at a glance. So it's like an Uber dashboard. And I set up a sample application in the fire drill mode. I call it a fire extinguisher application. And I'm going to say that I'm going to get going here and tell you a little story while I do this. So let's say you have a new feature. And by the way, I should say, this story is kind of like a bad news story. I'm going to tell the bad news version first. You have a new feature. You're really excited about that feature. You have been working hard, and your marketing team has actually lined up an influencer to write an article about it. So it's launch day. You deploy the new feature in the morning. You're really excited. The deployment went just perfectly. Everything's working great. And you know that the article is coming out at noon. And at 11:59, the article gets posted. Again, everybody's quite happy. But the article has a link to it, to your application. And things start to go viral. People are really picking up on this. Oh, look at this. This is very cool. This is very cool. And over lunchtime, traffic is growing. It's growing a little bit too fast. You did some preparation for it, but not enough. Your application team might have built some runbooks ahead of time, but they kind of threw the application over the wall to the operations team and said, good luck. You guys need to support this. And so that's a problem. The CPU is starting to grow. The site is slowing down. And the operations team said, well, I remember talking about this quickly. We have these background tasks, and they're running really slowly. And I remember them saying we can kill background tasks if things are getting out of control. So let's kill background tasks. Well, how do we do that? The runbook doesn't really give me the information I need. I have an idea. Why don't we just actually restart the whole application? I know that clears the queue, and I think that'll put us back into a situation that we can survive this traffic surge. So the operations team kills the application, restarts things, but actually, for an unrelated reason, it doesn't start up. And people are clicking on the links to the site and getting page not found. Actually, they're just not seeing anything. And sort of in your moment of glory, in your moment of we made it and we launched successfully, you didn't handle the traffic well, and the comments on the article are just saying fail. And again, really, I look at that, and the problem that happened was we didn't have good communication. We didn't have good connective tissue between the application team and the operations team. So I'm going to go through a happier scenario here and have you take a look here at Application Manager, and my application has an alarm. I'm going to take a look at this alarm right here. You can see, again, this is sort of the dashboard. It shows me all the things that are going on in that application. I'm going to click on this here. Take a look at what the issue is. And again, sort of that same scenario, but this time the teams have been talking. And you see there's an error here, and it says, reduce number of background tasks. The teams have talked already. And there's a dial and a switch to reduce the number of background tasks. I'm going to jump over here to a tool that helps you reduce the number of background tasks. This is AWS App Config. App Config contains configuration values. If some of you are using Parameter Store, App Config integrates with Parameter Store. It also has its own storage for for configuration values. And I'm going to show you a really simple configuration here, but it shows that the maximum number of background tasks is set to 100. The operations team said, oh, I know I need to reduce that. I'm going to put it to 4. So let me go in here and just make a quick edit. Do a quick edit. All right. I'm editing my configuration. I'm going to deploy my configuration. So app-config allows you to deploy that configuration. Best practice is deploy things slowly. And you can do that. Because I'm doing a demo, but also this is an emergency, I'm going to say, I need this out instantly. So I'm going to instantly push out a new configuration, and it's out. I'm going to go back and run my Lambda real quick. Oh, actually, let me show you this, too. This is kind of neat. So again, it's sort of crisis mode. You're worried about CPU. You need to move fast. And your team says, oh, I'm going to edit my configuration, and I want it to go from 100 to 4. And then I say, OK, yeah, 100 to 4. And I don't know how well you can see my cursor, but oops, I typed in 4,000. This kind of thing happens all the time. A small typo can cause things to go horribly wrong when they're already not happy. And I'm going to deploy this change. I'm thinking I'm deploying 4, and I'm actually deploying 4,000. Start deployment. All right, again, this is an emergency. I want it to go out now. Wait a minute, there's an error. And if you take a look at this error, it says, wait a minute. You're trying to deploy 4,000. The max is 100. So I've configured app-config to do a validation on the configuration before it goes out. You can say, I want to have a maximum value. You can adhere a validator to a JSON schema. You can also actually have a more sophisticated validation and call a Lambda function. And whatever you want that Lambda function to do, it can say, I must pass this Lambda function before I validate. So in that case, you might say something like, before I push new values into a database, I want to make sure that the database is available. So you can have a Lambda function as a validation that says, let me go make sure I can find this table and I can read from this table before I start using the database. So that's our change that we did to hopefully remediate the situation. I'm going to go back into Applications Manager. And things are happy again. All right, so we avoided the negative press and we survived our traffic surge. I'm going to go back to my slides now. And Dave, if you don't mind coming up, now we're going to sort of switch gears. Again, best practices was the title of this session. We're going to give you a list of some best practices. Some of these are really easy for you to implement, so I hope that you take some of these and adopt them right away. Some of you might think, well, it'll take us some time to implement this. Put them on the back burner. But let's dig into some things that we do at AWS to sort of ensure that availability and that security mindset. Dave did talk about mechanisms. That's a word we use a lot. I don't know if you've ever, and I've done this before, we've had a retro on something that went wrong, and we're like, yeah, that didn't go so well. Well, now we're more aware of the situation. We're going to be more attuned to it. So that's one of the things we're going to do. Now we know. We're going to make it better. A little skeptical there. Oh, we should just try harder. Next time, we'll just move faster. Those kind of things that happen all the time in a retro really are good intentions. And if that's what comes out of your retro, I don't have a lot of confidence that things are really going to change. You need to build mechanisms. Mechanisms are just process changes. You actually need to build new processes in how you respond to these things. And that process could be a technical process. It could be an automated runbook. It also could be a documented process that you saw already. It's just an updated list of things to do. So when we have these issues at AWS, and they happen, we have this process that allows us to create mechanisms to address the situation and not just rely on good intentions. You hear this all the time in our meetings. Somebody makes a suggestion about how we can improve things, and somebody will say, that really just sounds like a good intention, and I'm not sure that's exactly what we want to do. So having that mindset, whether you're on the DevOps team, CloudOps team, application team, that I want to build mechanisms to sort of guarantee that it's not going to happen again is the right mindset. So a quote from Jeff Bezos, good intentions never work. You need good mechanisms to make anything happen. The next thing is a best practice. We're here in Las Vegas, and if you've ever used a slot machine, you know it's a little bit addicting, and a roulette wheel as well. And in human psychology, randomness actually creates this sort of addicting thing. So I don't know when I'm going to get a payoff next. I'm going to stay tuned to it and keep trying until I get that. So we actually took that principle and we have this wheel. On this wheel you see here, there's all different teams inside of AWS. We have a weekly meeting that's attended by, honestly, most of the engineers in the company. It's a 2-hour operations meeting. And we go through some of the successes and failures of the last week. People are paying attention during this meeting because they want to look at, oh, this team did this. That's how they addressed it. We might run in that situation. We should do something. So it's important to have that meeting where you're going through with everybody looking at this from an operational lens. But the second half of the meeting is really the random part, which is cool. We have a spin the wheel thing. So we spin this wheel, and whoever it lands on has to do about a 10-minute presentation about some operational wins they've had recently and some things that they've learned. And that randomness to know that you might be on stage makes you prepared every single week. Every week before this meeting, we meet as a team and we say, what are we going to talk about if the wheel lands on us? So again, kind of a simple thing to do, but it keeps all the teams engaged, and so it means that somebody's not multitasking, saying, oh, I got to go to that operations meeting. People say, I might have to present at that operations meeting, I'll be ready for it. So. We do have that wheel available in software that you can download as open source and plug in your team names. And there's a link to it there, or you can just search for AWS Ops Wheel.
So that actual wheel, the picture of the wheel that you can see there, is actually on my desk at work. It is a physical wheel. That was where we started from. It actually had a bug in it where it was actually kind of misweighted in one area. So there were a couple of teams that never were going to be spun. But thankfully, we created the software version of it, and software never has any bugs, so it's fine. It's totally fine. So one of the other things that we do is we sound the alarm to raise awareness. So we use visual cues to drive immediacy. And what we do is actually kind of ensure that, hey, if we're in the middle of an event, a large-scale event, that we make that available and known through our ticketing system, through chat, through kind of the tools that we know engineers are going to be working with. Because again, it's not a fun place to be when you're an engineer, you get paid for something, and you don't have that context about what's going on around you. And so this is one of the ways that we ensure that people know, hey, this is not a drill. We have this nice, beautiful kind of what we call the klaxon effectively internally within our tools that is kind of spinning such that people know what's going on. So that's one of the other things that you can do. One of the very easy things that kind of raises visibility and improves communication within your org. I'm going to turn that off. It's kind of distracting. I don't know if you knew that. Did anybody know? It was a little distracting. All right, so we're going to wrap up. We're quickly running out of time, but again, want to thank you a ton for your time and attention here. So a couple of key takeaways. The first is, again, work backwards from your customer. No matter which, if you're a cloud ops group, make sure you're talking to your application teams. If you're an app team, please make sure that you're kind of interacting with your cloud ops team. Work backwards from there. The next is, again, use AWS Systems Manager. That's really kind of what we designed it for, to be kind of the centerpiece around how you manage operations on AWS, including in a hybrid environment. And so, you can use a lot of the techniques there to make sure you're kind of reinforcing those best practices across teams.
We did talk about this. I really can't overstress the importance of communication. I have a theory that every single problem inside of software is a communication problem. If you really do its root cause analysis, it's a communication problem. So if you have that mindset, what you want to do is make sure that the communication's flowing. And again, hopefully you've seen some tools here. You guys probably know of Conway's Law, that you ship the software that represents your organization. Tools help enforce this communication as well. So hopefully you've seen some tools that will help build that connective tissue. And finally, we've thrown a lot at you. My recommendation is think about what of these best practices that you saw would work at your organization and start small. Maybe you just want to start with a wheel. That's an easy thing to do if you're already having a weekly meeting. Maybe you want to have the visual indicator. The ORR checklist, critical, but maybe a little bit overwhelming at first. So you adopt that 3 months later, that kind of thing. So start small. It'll make a big difference as you go along. All right. If you've ever bought anything on Amazon, you probably, at checkout, have noticed that we recommend other things. Now, this is getting towards the end of reInvent, but we are going to be broadcasting everything that's been recorded, and so you'll have a chance to look at some of these related things to this session. Maybe you've been to some of these, but again, please check out some of these other sessions. thank you very much. Again, thanks for sticking with us. It's been a wonderful week, super energizing, but I'm also a little tired. I'm ready to go home. Maybe you're feeling the same. What I think we're going to do, instead of having open questions now, I think Dave and I will stay up here, and if you have questions, you can come to us and ask. And then the last thing we ask is please fill out the surveys. That really helps us make the sessions better in the future. It lets us know what gaps we missed and what we did well. But please take time to fill out the survey. All right, thanks very much. Have a great rest of your reInvent and have a great time getting home. Thanks.
Thanks for the time.